Good evening. Welcome to the Costa Mesa Planning Commission meeting for Monday, May 13th. I'd like to call the meeting to order and ask Commissioner Zick to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you, Commissioner Zick. Julie, roll call, please.
Chair Jericho,
Here.
Vice Chair Harlan,
Here.
Commissioner Colbert,
Present.
Commissioner Navarro-Woods absent, Commissioner Zick.
Here. Great, thank you very much. We have no announcements or presentations tonight. That will take us to public comment to ensure fair and equal treatment for all who appear before the Planning Commission and to expedite city business. Speakers may be limited to 3 minutes during public comment to speak on any item within the Planning Commission's jurisdiction which is not listed on the agenda this evening. This time may be extended for good cause by the chair or by a majority vote of the Planning Commission. Anyone wishing to speak in public comment tonight? Yes, ma'am. Good evening.
You do know that there's no sound, right? That these things are being recorded, like the last week's city council meeting, and there's no sound. So you can turn it on, but you can't hear anything, just so you know.
Okay, thank you.
So you might ask them if the sound is going to be working tonight. Okay, so I keep putting request records in for the property one door down. It's a sober living facility. And I keep last week we took 3 of us went to the second floor, and we tried to talk to the code enforcement and the planning people and everything, and no one seemed to know what anybody else was doing. And they all said, we don't have enough staff to look into this. I find that to be the most ridiculous comment. I've put in public request records up to 3 months ago. They're still saying they can't find everything. So then I said last week or the week before, I wanted the hard copy, I wanted the actual file. And they said, well, it didn't exist. And then they said, well, we can't find it. I mean, I'm not joking. I have it in writing. I find this unacceptable, and I'm starting to think it's illegal, because don't they have to give it to me within 10 days? And then they've asked for a 2-week extension, but of course that's like over 2 months ago. I still do not have these records. I should not have to go and get an attorney and get a subpoena to get the records on that property. We all know it's illegal. I think Willa should retire. I think her relationship to the recovery community is outrageous. I think that is Mr. Morehart's triple net lease. He's good friends with Mr. Mensinger. I think the whole thing was slipped through before there was a change of majority council. I think this is absolute corruption, and I've asked you people to do something about it, and no one responds. So what am I supposed to do? Where am I supposed to go? If not you, who? Thank you.
Thank you. So, Mr. Curtis or Mr. Preziosi, can you, first of all, with respect to public records requests, from what I understand, the law, it is 10 days, but there are provisions that the city can either deny that request or withhold documents part of the request. So without getting into length, what are the general rules about fulfilling public records requests?
Thank you, Chair. The general rule is that the city is required to respond either in 10 days or in certain circumstances. They can extend that 10 days by an additional 14 days for a total of 24 days. However, the duty to respond is not the same as the duty to produce records. So there's an additional duty on the part of the city to respond to the request to indicate whether it's going to produce records or not produce records, or some hybrid of the same. That's not the same with actually producing the records. That's a different matter. It's not governed by a particular time limit.
Okay, and within the city of Costa Mesa, are all public records requests vetted by the city attorney's office? Well, I asked him, Ann, but thanks for answering.
I would decline to answer that at this time due to attorney-client privilege.
Okay, thank you. Okay, appreciate that. Anyone else wishing to speak during public comment? Okay, seeing none, we'll close the public comment and move to planning commissioner comments and suggestions. Commissioner Zick, do you have any comments tonight?
I've got a couple, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
On the subject of the small cell sites, a topic that's come up in a couple of previous meetings had to do with the field test that takes place upon completion of installation, and then some discussion about where that report would reside in case there were interested parties. And I believe a suggestion had been made that it would be on the website. I'm bringing up the question, how, if there's a way or a mechanism by which we can learn about the completion of the installation of one of these small cell sites. At the last meeting, it was reported that none have been completed. So I am curious to find out when they're completed so I can actually see some of these reports. So that's a suggestion. If staff can help find a way to either just signal me or signal the public that these are completed. The second subject, I've commented before about the report that we get from the finance director periodically on sales tax. I find it very interesting, and I'm very appreciative that staff provides this to us when it becomes available. And I had a couple of questions or comments about it. One is, I notice at the bottom of one of the pages, it indicates that the information is confidential. So my first question about that is, does that mean that this report is not available to the public via our website? That's correct. Okay. And then the question that I'm interested in is to know under which category of the sales tax revenue would we expect to see the cannabis business gross receipts tax show up?
Mr. Curtis, would you happen to know that, or Ms. Lee, where cannabis tax revenues would show up in the various categories?
I do not offhand on a few, Jennifer. Otherwise, we absolutely can get back to you and tell you get an
Okay.
answer for that.
I'm very interested in that. Thank you. And that's the extent of my comments.
Maybe food and drugs? I don't know. Anyway, thank you, Commissioner Zick. Commissioner Colbert, do you have any comments?
No comments at this time.
Okay. Vice Chair Harlan.
Nothing tonight.
Okay. I have a few items related to legislation that's moving through Sacramento right now, as well as a budget item in Governor Newsom's budget that popped up that was covered by the Daily Pilot, and then a couple of events. So I've spoke before on Senator Wiener's SB 50 bill, which is a transit housing bill, which essentially would permit almost by right higher density housing development near transit centers. And this is one piece of legislation that is moving forward ostensibly under the state concern for the housing crisis, or the housing, what I call the housing attainability crisis. What has transpired is two things that bother me. One is that apparently the fine folks who represent Marin County got to convince Senator Wiener to exclude coastal communities with 50,000 population or less from the rules of SB 50. So while communities like Costa Mesa and other Orange County communities may be having to deal with higher density requirements that are state mandated, the affluent communities of Marin County will not have to, at least as I understand it. And I think that's unfair, and I think it kind of reinforces what a lot of people suspect about the power structure in Sacramento and who actually pulls the strings. And so I'm disappointed that that piece of legislation was modified that way. The other thing is that there's provisions in it now that essentially will allow duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes in R1 zones. So essentially taking what single-family detached home communities and the state mandating that you have to permit duplexes, fourplexes in R1. So I think I'm paying attention to this legislation. I know that the city council is, and I know Mr. Curtis and his staff and Mr. Preziosi are paying attention to it, but it's quite disconcerting that Sacramento, in its infinite wisdom in trying to solve our housing crisis, which I believe there is one, they are assuming that all cities are not going to do what they need to do to modify their zoning, to adjust their housing elements, to add more housing to their communities. I think Costa Mesa is perfectly willing to do that, but you have to do it systematically, and you have to do it, in my mind, through the normal housing element update process, which will start happening in about a year and a half when we get our new RENA allocations. But to kind of move this legislation and basically threaten all cities with loss of their land use authority with respect to housing is kind of just is irritating to me. The other thing that kind of falls in that same category is that the Daily Pilot reported a couple of days ago that Governor Newsom put $2.2 million in the budget to study potential options for the use of a portion of Fairview Developmental Center for the treatment of homeless individuals who need treatment beyond just help finding shelter, maybe getting over an addiction, maybe dealing with mental health issues. And I note this after the city has gone to extraordinary lengths and has spent tens of millions of dollars to establish not only a temporary homeless shelter, but a permanent one, ultimately, over by the airport, at great expense to our general fund budget. We have a lot of things that we have priorities in this community, and we've spent quite a bit of money under the threat of not being able to enforce our anti-camping ordinances by a federal judge. And so we're doing our part, as we always seem to do. We're doing it now and helping our homeless population with a permanent facility. We clearly are taking on an outsized portion of dealing with sober living in Orange County. We have an exceedingly high percentage of the county's sober living homes. So we're doing more than our fair share there. And so all of a sudden now, the state, I guess, seeing our benevolence in dealing with these issues, decide that maybe they ought to spend some money to study Fairview Developmental Center for helping, as David Carter put it in a news story I saw, helping the demented homeless find help. So I would suggest that and I know the city council is paying attention to this, I think we should fight that vigorously. I noted some comments in the pilot from Mayor Foley, who I thought was pretty firm about it. I was a little less enthusiastic about Assemblymember Petrie Norris's comments. I think we ought to tell them, no, thanks. If you want to spend $2.2 million on homelessness, why don't you help us pay for the permanent facility that we've just set up? Or at least give us a portion of that money. But I don't support, I think we're doing more than our fair share on a variety of fronts on helping people in society. I think we have a lot of priorities in this community with respect that we've looked at Fairview Developmental Center before, from athletic fields with lights to housing, which we're going to need more of when the new RENA allocations come out. And so to automatically assume that Costa Mesa, because Sacramento seems to think we've hung a sign outside City Hall that says kick us, and so they'll kick us. So we ought to take that sign down with respect to that on Fairview. I'm a little bothered by that. Two events coming up that I'm excited about. A week from this Friday, May 24th, is the dedication of the new library over at Lions Park. It's a spectacular facility. I drove by it the other day, and I think this is going to be a real asset to the community. And then on June 5th, the Costa Mesa Chamber of Commerce, along with Councilmember Andrea Marr, are hosting this Ask a City Planner seminar from 11:30 to 1 p.m. It's at Fete, the venue over on Red Hill. This, I think, any property owner in Costa Mesa who's thinking about ADU, small lot subdivision, a business person thinking about setting up a business, this is going to be a good seminar to come to. The lunch is included with the $25 ticket if you're a non-member of the chamber, $20 if you are a member of the chamber. So if you'd like to go to this, and I would encourage you to do so, I will be there. So you have questions to ask of a planning commissioner, you can also do that. You can register at costamesachamber.com/events for that. So I hope to see a lot of our Costa Mesa community there at this event as well. And that's it for me. And that will take us to the
Chair, if I
consent
may.
count. Yes, Ms. Lee.
I have a little bit of information as to Commissioner Zick's question regarding the cannabis tax revenues. Those do not show up in the sales tax report because they're a gross receipts tax, not sales tax. So in general, I have a general number for you. We've collected approximately $105,000 as of April 30th. Those line item numbers can be found in other reports, but they're not in the sales tax report.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, that brings us to the consent calendar. All matters listed on the consent calendar are considered to be routine and will be acted upon in one motion. There will be no separate discussion of these items unless members of the Planning Commission staff or the public request specific items to be discussed and are removed from the consent calendar for discussion. Items removed from the consent calendar will be discussed and voted upon immediately following Planning Commission action on the remainder of the consent calendars. Members of the public who wish to discuss the consent calendar items should come forward to the microphone upon invitation of the chair. State your name and address for the record. We have two items in the consent calendar. The agenda, the meeting minutes from April 8th and the 2018 annual review of the Costa Mesa 2015-35 general plan. Anyone wish to pull that item? Which item, Ms. Parker? The minutes. Okay, thank you very much. Anyone else? Okay, so I would ask then that we have a motion on item number 2 in the consent calendar, the general plan annual report.
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, call for the question.
That motion carried 4-0 with Carla Navarro Woods absent.
Okay, Ms. Parker, yes. Can I have you, before you start talking, so that...
Several weeks ago, the sound was working, so it's all on tape. And Mr. Zeke, you asked Mr. Curtis to look into the property right down the street that I keep talking to you about. And Mr. Curtis, you said that you would have a report for him in 2 weeks. It's in the minutes, I'm sure. I haven't read the minutes. It should be in the minutes. So where's the report? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Parker. Mr. Curtis, do we have an update on that matter?
Yes, I believe the question came up last meeting, and I indicated it would come back this meeting, and it'll be back tonight.
Okay. Thank you. Can I have a move on the minutes from April 8th? A motion.
I move that we approve the minutes of April 8th.
Okay, I'll second, and we'll call for the question on that.
That motion carried 4-0 with Commissioner Navarro Woods absent.
And Commissioner Zick, I imagine Mr. Curtis will have a report on that during his report at the end of the meeting. Thank you. Okay. Okay, public hearing number, we have one public hearing tonight. Public hearing number 1, Julie, please.
Public hearing item number 1, planning application 19-01 for a marijuana manufacturing facility, CR Manufacturing at 3550 Cadillac Avenue. This is a call to report any ex parte communications.
Thank you, Julie. Commissioners, any communications to report? Okay, seeing none, Mr. Glupos, the report is yours tonight.
So good evening, Chair and Planning Commissioners. I'm Mule Glupos, an Assistant Planner for the City of Costa Mesa. Tonight, we have a proposal from CR Manufacturing. It is for a non-volatile marijuana manufacturing business at 3550 Cadillac. It is located in the Measure X zone and is zoned industrial park, which is similar to the surrounding uses. In this diagram, the purple is the subject building. To the north in yellow is Sol Distro. It's also a manufacturing and distribution marijuana business. It's not in operation. To the east in orange is a business for an electronic parts manufacturer, and to the south is a printing business. This slide shows the exterior photos taken from the street and parking lot. Note that there are two roll-up doors along the parking lot. Furthest to the right will be used for the Metro X business. Going inside the building, the upper left image shows the entrance, and that will be used to vet the visitors if the business gets approved. This photo shows the warehouse space. Half of the warehouse will be used for the actual cannabis business. The rest will be ancillary offices to support actual business. The photo below is the roll-up door that I've mentioned earlier that will be used for the actual business. The applicant is requesting a Type 6 non-volatile manufacturing, as mentioned earlier. The applicant applied for a cannabis business permit October 9th of last year. Later last year, they received a notice to proceed. The applicant submitted a CUP application January 4th. To date, there are 23 approved Measure X CUPs. 3 has received their business permits, and 3 are in the process, including 1 today. So the property is owned by Hot Performances. The total building is approximately 12,000 square feet, 4,000 of which will be the licensed premise for the cannabis business. The 2 main end products that CR Manufacturing will be producing are vape pens and cartridges. The existing building has 4 doors, 4 roll-up doors. The roll-up door to the upper right will be sealed, and the roll-up door to your lower right will be used for the cannabis business. So the proposed plan will essentially have 2 major rooms. One, as I keep mentioning, will be for the Metro X business. The other one will be the ancillary spaces. That includes the office, conference, and non-cannabis product delivery rooms that will support the actual business. So within the licensed premise, the general process will occur as shown. Cannabis product will enter the shipping and receiving area. From there, it would be organized, recorded via track and trace system, and stored in the storage finished goods or in the DEA storage until it is ready for production. And once it's ready for production, it then is transferred to the production manufacturing packaging room. Once it is either filled by a filling machine and it is done in the production, it will go back into the storage until shipping and receiving or distributors pick up the products. So more specifically, within the manufacturing process, essentially step 1 in blue here, empty cartridges and pens would go into the actual manufacturing space. Once it is ready within the filling machines, the oils are brought into the space and filled. In step 3, it would be assembled into, again, either a vape pen or packaged as individual cartridge refills. So in regards to deliveries, the existing roll-up door will be utilized, and the licensed distributor will need to contact an authorized personnel prior to their arrival. It has been conditioned that the space is closed and free and clear of any products prior to offloading and unloading. In general, all activities will occur inside the designated shipping and receiving area. For the security plan, there will be approximately 48 cameras. There will be removable bollards in front of the roll-up doors. Credential key fobs will be installed. There are 2 emergency doors, which is shown in orange there. And then we have 1 main entry, which is shown with a star. The security plan, as well as the operations plan, was reviewed by HDL, which is the city's security consultant, and it was inspected with staff January 28th of this year. The applicant is proposing to install carbon filters, and as staff included in the conditions of approval that odor control device would need to be incorporated to ensure any odors of cannabis not be detected outside property and non-cannabis tenant space. That includes the shaded in blue here. Staff has applied more than 30 conditions of approval, such as obtaining permit within 24 months, the signage requirement, consumption of cannabis on the premise, an age requirement. Staff also included specific conditions for this specific business. One would be that loading area should be free and clear, as mentioned earlier. And prior to distributor's arrival, the distributor are required to give notice to authorized facility personnel. And also, licensed premise should be clearly delineated on the plans from non-cannabis licensed premises. Staff recommends that Planning Commission adopts a resolution and finds the project categorically exempt from CEQA and approve planning application 19-01 subject to conditions of approval. That concludes my presentation, and the applicant is here with the presentation as well.
Thank you, Mr. Glupos, for your presentation. Commissioners, do you have any questions of staff? Commissioner Zick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you for the report, John Willie. So you indicated that the intended production was vape pens or vape pen refill cartridges. And my question is whether or not the other product types that we've seen other manufacturers produce would be acceptable for this applicant to produce beyond what you stated as vape pens and refill cartridges. In fact, let me hold your answer to that by pointing out that on page 87 of the staff report, it's indicated that among the manufacturing equipment items, there will be rolling machines which will be used to assist in the rolling of pre-roll products. So I'm asking my question in light of that information.
Commissioner Zick, the applicant did submit, unfortunately, I do apologize, an updated sheet for page 87 that eliminated the actual rolling machines.
Okay, no, that's a good answer, and I appreciate that. I'm curious about this idea of the licensed premises. And I'm not sure what's involved in, I'm not sure why it would be important to license only 4,400 square feet of the 12,000 square foot operation. Could you help enlighten me on why that distinction is made and why it's important?
Commissioner Zick, in this case, the applicant has proposed a portion of a single building for their licensed premises. Usually, we don't necessarily make a distinction, but in this case, the applicant's proposal is to use a portion of the building as the licensed premise. So that's the only reason that we've created that distinction here.
So I'm still, okay, so I appreciate that, but that doesn't quite help me understand, because it's pretty clear from the floor plan and the depicted uses that the entire building premises is used in support of the business, recognizing that the I'll call it the non-licensed premises doesn't contain any cannabis. So I'm curious still about the distinction between the licensed premises and the non-licensed premises when it's all one operation.
So the conditional use permit is for the entire operation. The licensed premises is really a distinction for state licensing purposes. From the city's perspective, it's a conditional use permit that runs with the property and applies to the entire building. So the distinction is really a state licensing distinction, and we show it here only to demonstrate which portion of the building is intended to actually process cannabis materials. The remaining portion of the building, as you have stated, is for support facilities like offices.
Okay. And then just a minor question on page 9. It mentions the requirement, at the top of the page, it mentions a requirement for steel grate walls required as barriers in the packaging area. Are these, is this like a see-through cage type of a wall, or is this an expanded metal material that is embedded, fastened to the studs and then covered with drywall? What is intended by that steel grate walls?
Commissioner Zick, it would be embedded inside the walls for extra protection, and HDL did recommend that that condition be applied, and the applicant did incorporate that into the plan.
Okay. And then I was just, well, this isn't a question for you, but you don't have to answer this. It's a question I have. Maybe it's one for the applicant. So it's on page 40 related to Whittier Law School. So I'll conclude my questioning there. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Commissioners, any questions of Mr. Glupos or staff? Okay. I will then open the public hearing and ask the applicant to come forward. Good evening, sir. If I could have your name and address for the record, and also ask if you have read the conditions of approval and if you agree with all of them.
Good evening, Chair and Council. My name is Milad Rafi'i, and yes, we have read the conditions of approval and agreed to them.
Okay, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you. If you can go to the next slide, please. CR Manufacturing is seeking Costa Mesa Planning Commission's approval to operate an adult use and medicinal type 6 non-volatile manufacturing facility at 3550 Cadillac Avenue. This facility will engage in 3 main manufacturing activities on behalf of its consumer brand, Orchid Essentials, which has a reputation for safe, reliable, and compliant manufactured products. These manufacturing activities include filling and packaging of vapor pens and cartridges. At the outset, our production will be focused on vapor pens and cartridges, as this product line has been our standout success and the most in demand. Upon local approval, we will be applying for a state annual Type 6 non-volatile manufacturing license. We have already been granted a state temporary license for this facility, set to expire at the end of April. Orchid Essentials is a trusted brand with a commitment to financial and community sustainability. We will be a proud and dedicated community partner that aims to elevate Costa Mesa, not degrade it as it's often feared. We look forward to work with the city to accomplish that. Next slide. Orchid Essentials has had a number of stellar milestones and achievements since its founding 2 years ago, including product launches, license acquisitions, and securing a listing on the Canadian Stock Exchange. Next slide, please. Our board of directors and executive team boasts some incredibly talented leaders with experience ranging from policy advising at the White House to multi-billion-dollar startup fundraising, over 2 decades in marketing, and a deep knowledge in supply chain management. Each member of the team brings a touch-tone of success to Orchid. Next slide, please. Our floor plans have been designed and redesigned through several iterations to ensure that our operational flow and security protocols are efficient, effective, and compliant. The rooms that are shaded in green are reserved for managerial and administrative functions in the operating of the business. No cannabis product will ever be in these rooms, but they will nevertheless be designated Level 1 limited access areas where there are no restrictions on employee access, but all visitors must be accompanied by an employee. The rooms shaded in yellow will be Level 2 access, which limits access to employees only. Authorized visitors will not be allowed in these areas. These rooms will house sensitive documents, servers, and activities that involve the handling of cannabis-like packaging and intake. The rooms in red will be the major spaces of cannabis activity. Cannabis will either be stored or used in production here. These areas are Level 3 limited access, and no one employee or vendor are allowed in these areas unless managerial staff is present. Next slide, please. The product operational flow is as follows. Oil is delivered through the steel roll-up to the cannabis shipping and receiving area. In the cannabis shipping and receiving area, product is reviewed against what was ordered and the track and trace records. Accepted product is moved into the oil, storage, and finished goods room. The product is stored in a DEA storage cage until it is ready for production. The production is moved to the packaging area once ready for production. Once product is made and packaged, it is moved back to the DEA storage cage until it is ready to be shipped out. When the distributor arrives to pick up finished product, it is moved back out through the cannabis shipping and receiving room. Next slide, please. For deliveries, the distribution company will first notify us 15 minutes before their arrival, so we are ready for an efficient and secure delivery process. Once they arrive, the distributor will need to pass through our parking lot gate once approved by security. At the entrance of the roll-up door, managerial staff will exit the facility and meet the distribution driver to review the invoice. If the invoice is correct, the roll-up door will be opened for the distribution truck to drive in to complete the delivery process. The roll-up door will be closed and locked while product is being loaded and unloaded. Next slide, please. Orchid Essentials has a broad and comprehensive quality control measures in place from the moment product arrives in our facility. Product and packaging are visibly inspected, its product information reviewed, its track and trace history reviewed, and its testing results reviewed. Each piece of information is verified against the others, and only if everything checks out sufficiently is product accepted. Product is then moved to the storage area and the DEA cage, where it's kept under the appropriate storage conditions to keep it in pristine condition. Next slide, please. Our product line at 3550 Cadillac will focus on vapor pens and cartridges. This includes the filling of vape cartridges, the assembly of some into whole cloth vapor pens, and the packaging of both. This slide provides an example of what that packaging and product will look like. Next slide, please. Before any oil is moved into the packaging room, the filling machine will be set up there and prepped for production activity. Once completed by the production specialist, they will alert managerial staff that the cannabis oil is needed to begin the production process. Managerial staff will retrieve the necessary amount of the oil from the DEA cage in the storage room and bring it to the packaging room. The machines will fill the empty cartridges with oil, and they will then be moved along to be capped. The production specialist will then take the finished cartridges and package them appropriately. Next slide, please. To give you a better idea of what the production rooms will look like, this is a diagram of our furnitures and fixture layout. Next slide, please. CR manufacturing will generate minimal waste in the normal production of process. In the event that product is degraded, fails testing, or is recalled, the oil in those cartridges will be remediated and reconstituted in such a way to pass testing. If the product fails testing for a third time, the distributor that has the product will be authorized to destroy it. All necessary track and trace records information will be updated. Product recall procedures will involve the destruction of recalled product as cannabis waste, according to state mandated requirements. Next slide, please. CR manufacturing takes security very seriously. This is why we have multiple points of protection above and beyond what is required by city and state. This includes motion detector sensors, a gated entrance, dual lock doors, tiered limited access protocols, and reinforced drywall. Our security plan was prepared by Matt Carroll, who has over 25 years of experience in public and private law enforcement capacities, as well as multiple degrees and licensures in law enforcement fields. Next slide, please. We will be taking additional steps to ensure that we are a pro-social and contributive actor in the city of Costa Mesa from the outset, including advanced odor control measures, comprehensively quality controlling and oversighting the product, and dedication to compliance. Thank you so much for your time. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, sir. Commissioners, any questions of the applicant? Commissioner Zick?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So on this question of the licensed premises, could you help me understand
Sure.
that?
Ultimately, the security consultant with the city HDL recommended we phrase it this way because of how we have to secure walls where there is actually cannabis versus how walls need to be secured where there is no cannabis, hence the steel grate. So that was really ultimately their recommendation because of how the facility was laid out. It would be best to term it. It's for state licensing more so.
Okay. I can see an advantage, though, to licensing your entire building in the event that your business thrives and you would want to expand. How would you deal with that with this reduced license premises issue?
Well, currently the premises is still fairly large, and we've taken into account potential expansion. But if we do run into issues with that, we would have to, whatever changes we'd want to make to the premises diagram or the operational workflow would have to be approved by the planning department. So we'd have to go through them to ultimately get their okay to make that happen in the first place.
Okay. Had a couple questions for you about the information that you've submitted, the staff report, handwritten page 39 to 40, where you're talking about the community benefits. And I understand employment, that's fairly straightforward. You talk about community organizations, too, in particular, that you're interested in working with, and the two issues that you are looking to deal with, having to do with criminal justice and healthcare. But you cite the Whittier Law School as an organization that you intend to work with. And I think the indication you're providing is that that is essentially financial support. Could you tell me a little more about what your intention is with regard to the this legal support partnership
Sure.
you're interested in?
So one of the big issues right now in the industry is individuals who have a criminal history in cannabis and are now, in a sense, being held back from entering into the industry because of that criminal background. So there's a big movement within the industry that to help individuals of that kind that don't have the resources to expunge or go through a process to get that removed from their record, assist them in that. And then at the same time, maybe even help with an employment program with that as well, too, to potentially employ them.
Do you see getting sufficient employees who can pass a background check? Do you see that as a barrier or a hurdle to your operation?
No, not at all. It's not an issue for our business in terms of resourcing employees or staff. It's more of of a larger issue that the industry has really brought up in terms of something that needs to be addressed.
Okay, and then the second organization you cite is SOS, Share Ourselves. And again, you indicate that your indication for support would be financial. Could you tell me what your intention is with that organization?
We haven't had specific sit-downs with them. We have tried to set up meetings, but our intention is just to provide support. That was a program that we thought was something that we could at least support in some way.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, sir. I don't think any of the commissioners have any questions for you at this moment, so I will ask you to have a seat, and I will open the public comment portion of the hearing. Anyone wishing to speak to this item, please come forward. Yes.
So that really sounds like a schmooze job to me. We're going to give to SOS, and we're going to give to the law school, and so we're really great guys. Well, I kind of resent your comment, Mr. Derrickle, about what's going on in Sacramento, because let's remember why we have all these marijuana businesses in Costa Mesa. It's because Scott Monahan and Jim Fitzpatrick, your friends and cohorts, and Jim Reichheimer, Steve Messinger wanted them here. They wanted the money. So let's not talk about Sacramento. And by the way, John Morlock is the one that pushed to have Fairview, Mr. Morlock, to become a state facility. Don't blame Connie Petrie Norris. I happen to know, I've been over in her office. She is vehemently opposed to this. Katrina Foley is vehemently opposed to this. So please get your facts straight if you're going to start saying things like that. So to me, I don't think we're ready for this. I do not think the city of Costa Mesa has a handle on anything. So in the paper, finally, after what, 5 months or 6 months, thanks to Arliss Reynolds and some other people on the west side, you finally closed a pot shop down here, which has been gleefully running and reported all the time, and no one did anything. But how about the 5 or so more that are running on Harbor right over here as we speak? They're illegal. They're not supposed to be running, and the city does nothing about it. And I don't think the city is going to be ready to handle what's going to happen out there on Cadillac Avenue. And what is the maximum amount of these businesses you can have out there? How many do we have already? And what was the other thing? Are we going to have more police presence out there? How are you actually dealing with this? And could they sublease part of the rest of that building? And to whom? And by the way, I don't think anybody should be in any kind of cash business like this without having a background check, period.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Good evening, Commissioners. Missed you guys the last couple of times, so I'm back. Needless to say, with all your wisdom and intelligence and greater level than the rest of us out here, we're not ready for this. You know, you keep saying how Sacramento is making decisions for us and so forth, yet Ms. Parker and I have been coming up here for years, literally, and I'll bring a point of contention. I did want to speak a little earlier in regard to this, and I didn't realize you guys were so punctual, but you guys put a bunch of condition on a property. The address is 1989 Orange Street. People such as this gentleman here came and stood before you and said, oh, we're speaking on behalf of the landowner. They needed to be an artist studio. They're going to do this, and you guys gave them quite a few conditions. Guess what? The property's for sale. I'll call it the way I see it. That was a snow job. They came in front of you. They dazzled you guys a bit. I don't know if you had any communication with them or not, but I'll find out. They got past. They built it, even though it definitely does not meet the neighborhood in any sense. And now it's for sale. How are you going to enforce this? How are you going to enforce these guys? They got cameras. They're in charge of the cameras. I mean, you're going to have a police officer sitting in front of these guys day in and day out? You guys are passing stuff on a blank slate. They're throwing a bunch of names of people with credentials and blah, blah, blah. Hoorah. It's not in their backyard. It's in our backyard. You're probably going to approve it because I can see it in your eyes already. That's just the way you guys roll around here lately. But it's okay. Change is coming, and I guess you guys are next. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak to this item? Okay, I ask the applicant to come back up if he wishes to have any closing comments. If not, very good. Commissioners, I will bring it back up to the dais to see if there's any last questions of the applicant or of staff while the public hearing is open.
Mr. Chairman?
Commissioner Zick.
Well, so I do have a question, and it's a question I've raised before, not from this spot, but a comment from the public is what rekindles my interest in this. The number of businesses that these cannabis businesses in Measure X, is there a point, and I guess I'm directing this maybe to an economic development perspective, is there a point at which we would be concerned that there are too many of these businesses in the Measure X zone? If every single building, every single suite was over a short period of time converted to these kinds of businesses, is there a point at which we'd begin to be concerned about that? And what would the concern be?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Zick, excuse me, the city approved Measure X for a very defined geographic area within the city, relatively small area. We do not have any figures for a specific amount that's the cap, other than the fact that it's allowed in all those properties. It is it's an industrial use, which is the same use as occurs in those areas. We do run every single one of these applications through the police department to determine if they have concerns, if they see anything, either that they want us to address through conditions or if they have any issues with the use in general. And to date, we've not approached any issues of those types of concerns. So it's possible that at some point in time we may come to a maximum or a saturation, but given the relatively small area and the fact that there's a limited number of business opportunities in that area, and we've already seen at least one building where the occupants didn't want these in their building, we're not aware of that such a number. We don't, and we haven't become aware of that from working with the police department or the community.
So you bring up a question about the police department and their review of all of these. Is there a point in any of those reviews where you've heard a discussion from the police department where they're concerned about staffing levels, specifically in response to this growing business area?
No.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Commissioners, any more questions? I will close the public hearing and ask for a motion from the dais. Okay, I will make the motion. So I move that the commission approve planning application 19-01, subject to the findings in Exhibit A, conditions of approval in Exhibit B, and find that the project is categorically exempt from the provisions of the California Environmental Quality Act under CEQA guidelines, Section 15301, Class 1, existing facilities. And if there's a second, I have some comments.
I'll second.
Okay.
I'll second.
Seconded by Vice Chair. I understand the public's comments. However, the voters of Costa Mesa believe the city is ready for this business, or they wouldn't have voted Measure X in. So we're administering a law and a set of regulations that the voters of Costa Mesa put in place via the ballot box. And so we're fulfilling our responsibilities in that regard. Commissioners, any comments on the motion?
Mr. Chairman?
Commissioner Zick.
Well, I'll be supporting the motion. Maybe my eyes revealed it, but the real reason I'm supporting this motion is because I can't find a reason not to. As Chairman points out, we are administering an ordinance which was passed by the voters, and we had a public speaker at our last meeting on the same subject, and he was very concerned about these businesses and what he felt was a a wrong message to our kids. That was paraphrasing his comment. Unfortunately, the criteria that we have for approving or disapproving this does not include what our personal feelings are about this business. What it says specifically is that we first have to find that the business is substantially compatible with developments in the general area. It is. We have to find that granting the conditional use permit doesn't allow a use density or intensity which is not in accordance with the general plan. It doesn't. And that granting the conditional use permit would not be materially detrimental to the health, safety, and general welfare of the public. Doesn't seem to be. I can agree with you all day long, but I'm supporting the motion. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Commissioners, Vice Chair Harlan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I hadn't planned on saying anything more because I think my colleagues have covered all the ground, but for one item, which is simply that what's before us is a conditional use permit. So we, in administering the ordinance, have the ability to provide some conditions requiring the applicant to conform with. That provides the protection for our community. And whether or not you like it, it provides that trigger for enforcement, and that runs with the land. So even if a property is sold, these conditions still apply. So I'm comfortable that because of the CUP, that gives us a certain investment in this business, which we would like to see thrive. We certainly don't want to see them fail, but they are also on notice that they have certain conditions they have to meet. So I think it's fair and equitable, and I'll be supporting the motion.
Okay, Commissioner Colbert, any comments? You don't have to. All right, go ahead.
I think my colleagues have covered it as well, but I would like to specifically speak to, while I understand the CUP and will be supporting the motion, the community benefits piece is what stood out the most to me, and I would like to just identify the criminal justice piece, because as you said, Mr. Graffiti, there has been a number of people that have been impacted that have a barrier to the industry, and particularly to owning and have access to this type of business. But I don't know if the law school, that the access program will continue if the law school does not continue to exist. So I just would like to see some expansion into other law programs or around the area to see if that potential benefit, which is something that I really appreciate, does not exist anymore, that you continue to continue it in some shape, form, or fashion at additional schools.
Thank you. And just one last point before I call for the question. Apart from Measure X and the voters approving Measure X, we also had statewide voters approve Prop 64, which basically legalized recreational use of cannabis throughout California. So I will go back and blame Sacramento, because guess what? AB 1356 is moving through Sacramento right now, which would require all cities to permit at least one retail cannabis center for every 4 bars or restaurants with a liquor license, or one for every 10,000 residents if that community supported Prop 64. So if you don't think Sacramento is wielding a big hammer with respect to governing local jurisdictions, you're mistaken. So I will call for the question.
That motion carried 4-0 with Commissioner Navarro Woods absent.
Thank you, and that decision is final within 7 days unless appealed to the City Council. Thank you very much. Good luck, gentlemen. Okay, that brings us to staff reports for this evening. And Public Services, any report tonight? Mr. Mejia.
No reports tonight.
Mr. Curtis, Development Services report.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. As I indicated earlier at the request of Commissioner Zick, I'll be providing a quick presentation, providing information regarding an approved group counseling use which exists at 657 West 19th Street. At the April 8th Planning Commission meeting in the public comments, this was brought up by Ms. Parker. And if you recall, Commissioner Zick requested that staff provide response back to the commission regarding the issues. So there's basically, as Ms. Parker indicated earlier, the site is about 2 doors down, easterly on 19th Street. There's really 2 uses kind of at question on the property. The first one was Solid Landings Counseling Center, which existed on the site up until late 2015. And the second use is a newer use. It's the current use of the property, which is Elite Care, and they've been operating out of the property since about October last year. So a quick history of group counseling uses at the subject property. This is regarding Solid Landings first. In April 2015, the zoning administrator approved a minor conditional use permit to deviate from parking requirements for a group counseling use at that site. The decision was based on unique operating characteristics for the proposed use, and specifically a finding that the use would generate low parking demand through the use of vans to deliver patients to the site. Based on this, the zoning administrator found the use to be in common with professional office uses and approved the use. Overall, the code required 67 parking spaces, and through the special characteristics, they were permitted to only have 29 spaces. In June of that year, the Planning Commission considered and overturned that approval of the zoning administrator after an appeal was filed by Ms. Parker. Based on evidence provided by Ms. Parker at the hearing, the commission found the use was not operating in keeping with the special operating characteristics that were asserted by the applicant, and therefore it was not providing sufficient parking for the use. The commission's decision did not find the use inappropriate in the zone or necessarily denied the use of the property, provided that parking requirements could be met. In July, the item was appealed to the City Council by the applicant, and after considering the matter, the City Council upheld the denial from the Planning Commission. That was July 2015. Later in 2015, and I do not have the specific date, because of the City Council denial and also as a result of a settlement agreement between the city and Solid Landings closed the subject location. Staff believes it has been vacant from that time until the fall of 2018. So after the Solid Landings decision, which again was in July 2015, the final decision by the City Council, in May of 2016, in response to the settlement agreement with Solid Landings I just mentioned, a then existing zoning administrator determination regarding group counseling was modified. And the modified determination considered group counseling the same as other professional office uses for the purpose of determining which zones that business could locate. Furthermore, it included an interpretive finding that no additional parking beyond 4 spaces per 1,000 gross square feet would be required as would be the case for a general office use, so long as certain operating parameters were satisfied. And those included that certain operating parameters were required to be memorialized in agreement with the city. And I want to note that in practice, staff used a project description letter from the applicant certifying what they were going to do. Staff used that as that required agreement. Several of the parameters were included. Several operating parameters were included, including of particular note, one, that all participants in group counseling shall be brought to and from the site in shuttle vans with a minimum capacity of 8 persons, that none of the clients may drive their personal cars or walk to the site, that no employee or client may park on public streets or any adjacent public or private property. There's a couple others, but those are the 3 major requirements that the applicant would have to meet in order to be able to be approved under that determination. So we're going to fast forward to the end of the summer of last year in 2018. In August of 2018, planning staff worked with representatives of Elite Care, who's the new occupant, to establish a new group counseling use at the subject property. Ultimately, at the end of August, staff approved Elite Care to operate at the site and to provide individual, family, and group counseling. The approval was based on Elite Care's assertions in its project description letter dated August 13th of last year that it would comply with all parameters contained within the zoning administrator determination. Based on the approval, Elite Care opened at the site in October of last year. Since that time, concerns regarding their occupancy of the site have resulted in me contacting Elite Care to develop a binding agreement to clearly define and confirm their compliance with the operational parameters upon which its approval is based. In other words, the zoning administrator decision required a binding agreement. Staff in practice from 2016 had been doing it as a letter. I disagreed with that, so we're requiring them, even though they're already in place, to complete that binding agreement that we can use to ensure that they meet those requirements. Furthermore, in January of this year, really based on concerns I have with our ability to enforce kind of general operating parameters like that, like folks not parking on the street, it's a public street, people park on it. It's very difficult for staff to ascertain whether they're meeting those requirements or not. Because of those concerns, I directed the zoning administrator to rescind her determination and to replace it through a reinstatement of the previous determination from 1908 or from 2008. This occurred in mid-January. And basically what happened is the reinstated determination requires a minor conditional use permit to deviate from parking requirements if adequate parking is not provided. So there's no relief given if you're willing to bring your patients in a van, any of those things. You have to meet your parking requirement. So that's what has changed. The applicant and staff in the city attorney's office have been working to complete the agreement. They've been cooperating with us to get that in place. My intent is to get that agreement finalized and to stringently and vigilantly enforce that to ensure that they meet those standards and to enforce against them if they do not. And I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Curtis. Commissioners, do you have any questions of Mr. Curtis?
Mr. Chairman?
Commissioner Zick.
So, thank you for that. I think I followed most of it. When you talked about this reinstated interpretation, was that an interpretation then that would say that the number of parking spaces required for that use would be 67 and that 29 parking spaces would be inadequate?
Based on, yes, I'd have to go back and see the exact square footages, but yes, that's correct.
So the letter that is currently being worked on, do you envision them living with 29 spaces?
No, Commissioner Zick. What basically they were approved under an agreement, under a standard that was in place at the time that they were approved to operate, which allowed them to have less parking than would otherwise be required so long as they were willing to meet those parameters. Our intent is to make them meet those parameters. Everyone going forward will have to provide all parking.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioners, anything else? Mr. Curtis, so just as a matter of policy and practice, we're no longer using project description letters as the binding agreements?
That is correct, and we're not even requiring binding agreements. It requires a CUP now.
A CUP, okay, perfect. So to follow up on Commissioner Zick's, in terms of the current occupant following the parameters, prior to the fixing of all this, they had not been operating under those parameters?
We've been out to the site approximately 30 times. We haven't seen any violations of those. But as I indicated, it's very difficult to enforce those. I can't tell who's parking in the streets. I haven't caught folks walking over. It wouldn't surprise me. They have a facility right down the street. So it's just problematic, honestly, to have those type of parameters.
So let me ask you a question. So you're working on negotiating an agreement under a minor conditional use permit?
No, it's basically what the zoning administrator decision from 2016 required was that they have a binding agreement, and that's basically a permitted use so long as they do that.
Okay. So you mentioned MCUP. What were you talking about there?
I rescinded that zoning administrator determination on a go-forward basis.
Okay. All right, thank you, Commissioners. Anything else? Okay, thank you, Mr. Curtis, for your report. Mr. Preziosi, any report tonight?
Nothing, Chair Jericho.
Okay. So we will then stand in adjournment to the regularly scheduled Planning Commission meeting of Tuesday, May 28th, 6 p.m. at Costa Mesa Senior Center. Thank you very much. Good night.